Hey guys, and welcome to another season of the Us People podcast. I'm your host, Savia Rocks, and in this season, we uncover the remarkable power of genuine compassion and insightful vision. This season, we're here to show the world that we, as individuals, are the brand, regardless of misconceptions. Join us as we go deep into the inspiring journeys of our guests, each one a testament to the impact and influence of kindness and creativity. Don't just take my word for it. Hear their stories, feel their passion, and discover the transformative potential within us all. So stay tuned as we shine a light on the truths that connects us and inspires change.
Hi, my name is Corinne Meadors, and I am an older actor, but there is a place for us too. And I'm coming at you with Us People podcast with Savia Rocks.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Us People podcast. I'm your host, Savia Rocks, and today I am abundantly humbled to have Corinne here with me, who is an actor and vocalist. Corinne, thank you so much for taking your time to come on the Us People podcast. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me.
You're more than welcome. So one thing I love to ask, or my first question that I love to ask any guest that comes on the show is, Corinne, could you tell me a bit about your background and where you grew up and how that influenced you to be the person who you are today?
Well, I grew up in a city, it's called New Bedford, and it's south of Boston. It's a fishing city. It's one of the biggest fishing ports in the United States. And my father grew up there, and my grandfather grew up there. However, my great-grandparents arrived at the city at the turn of the century from Quebec. And so I'm French-Canadian through my dad. Anyhow, that's just kind of sidestepping. But New Bedford is a very interesting city. You have predominantly population there. It's very diverse. And so growing up for me was really being around different types of kids. A lot of them were immigrants, either from Quebec or from Portugal, because it being a fishing city, you had a lot of Portuguese fishermen from Portugal and from the Azores that took an interest into the industry and moved their families over. So I grew up with a lot of kids who were learning English, and my father his profession, he was a teacher of languages. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom. Yes. And I'm one of 5 kids.
Whoa.
And and one thing about my parents is that they met when they were in college, and they went to Stonehill College, which is not too far from New Bedford. And both of them, just by their very nature, are very passionate about the arts in ways where it almost felt emotionally debilitating. Yes. Like you can be so passionate and so in love with what you do or with what you're experiencing coming from other people. It creates an intensity within you where you really want to share it.
Yes.
And so my parents shared that with each other, and they met while, at college, like I mentioned. They were both actors at the time, amateur actors, and they worked on a play, Man for All Seasons, together, and that's essentially how they met.
That's kind of cool.
So, they met on the stage, and after having us, they set out to direct their own productions and getting the entire community involved. And so my very first on-stage experience was in The King and I as part of the ensemble. And I was 8 years old, with my siblings. At that time, there were only 4 of us. My youngest sister wasn't born yet. Prior to that, they had co-directed it's Rodgers and Hammerstein, My Fair Lady. Now, this was in 1975.
Yeah, wow.
So this is a way, I mean, it's way back. And so at that time, when people were thinking of putting on productions and doing Broadway shows, at that time, you were kind of limited in what you had to work with versus now. Yeah. I mean, it's over 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the classics. But here's the thing, my dad especially, not only was it being an actor, that was one aspect of how he chose to express himself. And I think the fact that he was a teacher kind of enabled him to have that captive audience, having the students there. And he was a big personality. He was also almost like profoundly interested in music. And he kind of stumbled upon it when he was a toddler, after contracting a bacterial infection that almost took his life. And it left him in a debilitated state for quite some time, and he kind of felt different. He did have a sort of a facial, I wouldn't use the word deformity, but it did affect his appearance a little bit. It made him very self-conscious. So he wasn't really out playing with the kids in the street, Yeah. So he just kind of sat in his room and started listening to records. And a lot of it was just like classical music. And so with that, he kind of found like these soundtracks for himself to kind of stimulate his imagination.
Yeah, I was going to say
and, and it became his best friend. And so for him, that was kind of the beginning of his lifelong passion with classical music. And it was accessible because it's the kind of thing that is not mainstream. So it doesn't cost money to go to your local library and take out vinyl and bring it home and listen to it.
That's true.
And that's kind of how it was growing up. We didn't have a lot of money. We kind of worked with what we had. My dad being a teacher by profession and, that being that many kids in the house, my mom was there to take care of us. Even being as educated as they were, it was almost like they put family at the center of everything and creating this very at home, like very rich environment. So he exposed us to music. And for some reason, I took to it in a way very similar to my dad, where I would play in the living room as he's playing these albums and everything. And kind of parallel to him having this interest, he learned the art of sound recording and engineering, starting with very, looking at your reel-to-reel machines and you're lugging around equipment. And so he taught himself a lot of what went into that profession. And he also decided, I think I might want to try lending my voice to becoming a radio personality. Mm-hmm. So he was during the school year, he was teaching, and then part-time, he was on the air locally, and then he was also kind of starting this foundation of going out to small ensembles and orchestras and setting up microphones. And so he did that for over 50 years. and he grew with the technology. When my parents co-directed The King and I, one of the things that my father did is he decided he wanted to share with the community, you know, people who were involved with making the production happen. He projected the film, you know, starring Yul Brynner and Deborah Kerr. So for him, it was kind of like movies, the music, the theater. It was this package of just exposure that he kept presenting to me and my siblings, to where I really couldn't see myself doing anything else other than being a part of this in some way. But you know, how does one do that? It's like it's nearly impossible. I learned how to sing just by singing along with music that he would play. I was in a church choir, and I kind of fell in love with just the sound of the straight tone, early music ensemble singing. Yes. And it wasn't until I was 17 years old that I really started to take it seriously and started formal training. So that's the vocal aspect of like my upbringing. The acting, it was always there. If it wasn't something that my dad was presenting, it was always something that he was showing us, my siblings and I, a movie, or, I mean, and for me, as a baby, I mean, I'm in my mid-50s, so the things that I was exposed to early on was a lot of black and white films.
Yes.
And I'll never forget the very first time I had this sting inside of me where I was so empathetic towards a character, and I was also at the same time extremely fascinated. It was when I was watching The Hunchback of Notre Dame with Charles Lofton, you know. And when you look at his character, the way that he portrayed it and the way that people were treating him, Quasimodo being who he was, but having like a beautiful heart and wanting to protect the people around him, but also to dealing with the poor treatment essentially coming from his older brother.
Yeah.
And humiliated in ways that were awful and just sad. And at the very end of the film, after everything had transpired, and he's by himself, and he's sitting next to a gargoyle, and he looks at it, and he knows how ugly he is, because Esmeralda, the woman that he loved, she went off with her Prince Charming.
Oh, yeah.
And he, you know, there's nothing he could do. So he looked at this gargoyle and he said, "Why wasn't I made of stone like these?" You know, and I was maybe 5 years old when I saw that. And I asked my dad, I was like, is he really like that? Is that how he really is? He says, no, he's wearing makeup, he's in a costume, and then he showed me pictures of what the actor really looks like in real life, and then I was sold on it. Growing up, when it came to wanting to be a character of sorts, it wasn't anything like, oh, I want to be like the most beautiful or the leading lady or anything. It was more or less like I'm very interested in the dark, almost twisted, the monsters and the creatures and, things that are just otherworldly. Yes. And I have yet to actually play something like that. But anyhow, that was the beginning, the very beginning where I was fixated on my mind. My mind was fixated on it. And any kind of play with friends or anybody that I hung out with in school, or always people that were kind of like on the fringe, that were, we had shared interests. And of course, I was in the drama club, and and I sang in ensembles at school. And when it came to graduating, well, you must earn something that's going to make you money, and you must be practical. And I ignored all of that.
Thank God, because I did too.
I ignored it. And my older sibling, my older sister, also, she just kind of went with incredibly intelligent person. And I told her recently how much I look up to her, and she means so much to me. And my younger sister, brilliant artist, vocalist, composer, actor. And then my other two siblings also involved in some form of expression and the arts. And I started risk taking, like, what do you do? I didn't have anybody paying for my education. That was something that I had to do on my own.
I know that feeling.
And it's the worst feeling. Back then, I graduated from high school in 1988. So I'm a kid of the 80s. And growing up in New Bedford, there are a lot of kids with a lot of dreams, but, we didn't have like a rich side of town. It wasn't that kind of city at all. And so all of my friends we all had similar backgrounds. I mean, granted, we all look very different from one another and whatnot, but we all kind of had this family unit that we came from, where things like sitting around the table, having dinner, going to church. Most of us were Catholic. So, I mean, if you're French, Canadian, Irish, Portuguese, chances are you're going to be Catholic. People from Cape Verdean Islands, all living in this like melting pot of a city. Anyhow, we all went to work. Like, we went to school, and after school we went to work. And the work ethic was pretty intense. My first job, I was 13 years old. It was my first job. I delivered newspapers every day after school. I'd get off the bus and go home, put my stuff down. Then I'd go to the street corner and I'd unsnap the bundle, put it into my paper route bag, and then I'd be walking up and down the streets, putting newspapers in doors. And I did this every day, Saturday and Sunday, and saved money on the side, but also it taught me how to work with money. And I did that until I was 15 and a half, and then I started working at JCPenney after school. And so, just a department store. So I had a job consistently throughout my life up until maybe when I had my first child at the age of 37. And I mean, it's just, it's not like I had these moments of respite where it was like, okay, you're at university now and it's all about school. No, I worked 30 hours a week. I paid rent. I paid for my groceries. I went to class, and I had a lot of friends who didn't have to worry about that so much. Yeah. But what was so empowering about it was because it was on my dime. I could do whatever I wanted.
That's true. You had control over it.
I could do whatever. So whatever mistakes I made, whatever risks I was taking, it was all on me. Mm-hmm. So I studied musical theater. I studied vocal performance. I studied art history. And the reason for that, the art history aspect, it wasn't just, okay, let's just memorize paintings and architectural landmarks and churches. It was everything that goes into a person wanting to be creative throughout time and how it affects their creativity. And because I had so many interests in music, in art, in film, in theater. I kind of molded all this together and decided, well, I'm interested in wanting to know what it is that drives people to be creative. And that's why I went after that as a major. I think it's a little different in the UK with art history. Yes. I went to the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, where studying art history, you're studying film history. I was also studying vocal performance, so with that, I had to study music appreciation and music history, and I could see these correlations throughout time and just how similar things were, mostly in the Western world, of course. And then I started looking at Japan, I started looking at Africa and the art that was coming out of there, and just how it was so culturally entwined with how people live their lives. You know, simple things like singing while you're working.
Yes.
And really making that a part of the experience of maybe it could be planting a garden, or, you know, treating nature with like profound level of respect, and, you know, so many things. So when I graduated from school, I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. I always wanted to pursue the, you know, the screen. The stage was one thing, but there was something about film which I kind of saw it as the ultimate art form because it encompassed so much. I just wanted to be a part of that somehow. And understanding that the tech aspect of it, just because of my dad's recording and his engineering, I knew that there was some aspect of that, you know, as a young person. And I didn't really have an opportunity to be exposed to that until I was maybe in my mid-20s. So you're looking at like 1990s.
Wow.
I was living in New Jersey and working in Midtown Manhattan at that time. And, you know, during a time when you didn't have social media, you didn't have the internet. And
that's not a bad thing, to be fair.
It really isn't, because what I found when you're in a big city and you have this, of course, you have this innate need to want to connect with other people. So it's not like you could just pick up your phone and do that. You know, you had to like go out of your home and, you know, go to places and do things. So New York City was a wonderful place, but I didn't have, you know, I was working a retail job. I was a cocktail waitress. You know, I'm trying to figure it out. I had an agent. I was going on auditions. What I needed and what I didn't have is I really needed a mentor.
Yeah.
I needed somebody to tell me, this is where you need to focus your energy, and this is how you can have essentially, you know, start to set some goals and how you can attain those goals. I didn't have any of that. So it was like shooting in the dark, and I was failing left and right. And it was demoralizing, especially when you're a woman and you're in your 20s and you just don't know. I did do some independent film. I did take classes with, you know, at HB Studio in New York City. Kind of like improv, the art of subtlety, scene work. It's the 90s, you know, you think of the films that were coming out back then. A lot of things were, you know, people were interested in these blockbuster films, but you had people like Robert De Niro, who seemed to be dominating the screen, Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, you know, and then Danny Boyle came out with Train Spotting. And it changed a lot with how my friends who are all in film, trying to do film, and this concept of independent film was kind of in its infancy.
Yes.
And that movie and that manner of storytelling combined with like a kick-ass soundtrack, it was very exciting. And I was instantly a huge fan. And then I was completely hooked. But it's like, how do I get into that? How do I become a part of that? And, you're just kind of living the dream.
Yes.
New York being as expensive as it is, I could only handle it for so long until I had to go back to my parents' house with my tail between my legs.
Aww.
Because I couldn't afford to live there.
Fair enough.
I couldn't do it. And I gave myself enough time to kind of figure things out and learn some life skills. But when I returned home, my parents were living on the Cape at the time. My dad was retired from teaching, forced into retirement because he had a heart attack. And so he couldn't be working in that capacity, but he was still doing his recording and his engineering. And so he was full-time artist. And so both my parents had created this really cute, just kind of wholesome little nook for themselves. And they kept the door open to all of us kids to come home whenever we wanted to, whenever we needed to, for like sanctuary, And so I took just a few months off, and then I kind of got right back into the spin of what am I going to do next? So the voice part of my life, being a vocalist, excuse me, I had been doing that all the while. I was doing theater in New York and in New Jersey. I was consistently singing. I was always working on my voice, but I decided I wanted to turn it up a notch. And so I joined an opera company, and I started doing recitals and learning repertoire and kind of bringing the acting and the subtlety and the minutiae of theater into recital singing and singing classical music. Not like in a dramatic sense. If it's just you and a piano or you and a small ensemble, it's what is in the text of what you're singing that you want to get the point across without overdoing it. So you're really trying to use your voice as an instrument.
Yes.
So I focused on that for a few years, and to where I felt like I was ready to move on from it. Life gets in the way. It presents you with challenges.
Very much
and
so.
I was in a relationship with a person that was very controlling and really did a number on my self-esteem.
Sounds like a narcissist to me.
It kind of, some people are who they are, and they can't help themselves. At one point, I was actually really seriously considering, I've had enough time here living with my parents, and I think I'm ready to go back to New York City again, give it another go. And I'll never forget this one day. I was listening to talk radio in one room. I was watching television. I was watching the Today Show because which is, right next to Rockefeller Center, because I used to work right around the corner from it. So I was kind of like, my mind was there. It was like, you know what? I think I'm ready to move back to New York. So, going into one room, making the bed, talk radio's on, going into the living room, spending a little time watching television. And then I hear the Associated Press in the bedroom say that a plane hit the World Trade Center.
Oh, yeah.
And so everything just kind of fell apart. I watched everything unfold live on television. My younger sister was living in New York City at the time. I heard planes flying out of Otis Air Force Base on Cape Cod, heading to New York City. My brother was about to fly out of Logan Airport. I had called my sister-in-law telling her, where's Andrew? I know that he's traveling. He can't leave. The plane's hitting the World Trade Center. And so it was kind of like, it was definitely a life-changing experience for me, that it shifted my perspective, and that I just couldn't depend on other people to kind of support me or thinking that I needed support from people.
Yeah.
Because so much at that time I felt like was just taken away from me, and so many people that I know. And New York City was out of the question. So what do people do when, you're traumatized like that? You gravitate towards the things that make you comfortable. And, I was watching movies. I was listening to a lot of music. I was reading a lot. I remember in an instant, a local music director of a choir, an ensemble called the Chatham Chorale, called me up, and she said, we're getting a group of people together, choir and orchestra, and we want to perform Fauré's Requiem in memory of all of the people that have perished. And would you like to sing and be the soprano soloist and sing the Pie Jesu? And of course, yeah, absolutely. And just using that energy to heal. But I was always thinking about movies. Like, I really want to get involved in it somehow because it has such an impact. And I was watching this film in the theater. I'm a big fan of Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, who isn't, right?
True.
and I'm also a big fan of Martin Scorsese because I grew up watching all of his films. And as a filmmaker, he takes a lot of risks. Gangs of New York had come out. And I went to see it in the movie theater less than a month after 9/11. And there's this sequence at the end of the film where it's from a perspective of looking at the Brooklyn Bridge from the Queens side of New York City, and watching the Brooklyn Bridge change over decades from the Civil War era to present day. And in the film, present day, at the very end of the film, present day was the World Trade Center, and he kept it in, and it was no longer there. And then during the film, Cameron Diaz's character was talking about leaving New York City and moving to San Francisco because she kind of felt like she had nothing there. War was happening, there's so much like civil unrest in the city. So she put that thought in my head, like, what? There are other places I can be.
It's true.
And less than 2 years later, I sold everything I had. I had just a couple $1,000s in my back pocket, and I went to San Francisco, started life over entirely on my own, and really with no prospects. It's just looking at Craigslist to try and find a roommate. And I found somebody, a really nice lady by the name of Kim, and her cat Buddy.
No.
And, what am I going to do next? So I moved out to San Francisco and got a job working in a museum, of course. And, it was hard. I got to where I was so tired of worrying about my financial situation, and I could only see just these roadblocks as I was getting older with, taking care of my health, what is my future going to be like? And then I started to feel a lot of just this dissonance with other human beings, other artists, because I don't know if it was just being from the East Coast and moving to California to an entirely different culture. If I just couldn't really vibe with people, I had to take a break from it. So I was still singing. I was with at that time, I was singing with the Lyric Opera Company, San Francisco Lyric Opera Company, and I was working with a voice coach. And Daniel Paulson, Dr. Daniel Paulson, he was wonderful. And I got my first real job where I was chained to a desk and was able to save some money for myself. It was hard. I really felt like I didn't fit in. It was very awkward for me being in a corporate culture, but it was in the Bay Area of San Francisco, not too far from Silicon Valley, and it was right where .com was having such an impact, and it was changing so much. I'm sitting at my desk, I'm getting to know one of my coworkers who's really funny, and we're trained together, and he's like, let's go for a walk, let's go out to lunch. And we're walking up the street and we see this like new company called YouTube. It's like, what is this YouTube all about? In San Bruno, California, we're like, what the heck is YouTube? This is in 2004. So here we are working right up the street from what is to be one of the biggest, website sharing platforms where people are sharing their art, sharing their content in ways that were not even fathomable. So I started to see your everyday person from an art historian's perspective, your everyday person who has this intense capacity and need to share, finally discovering a way in which they can do that. So we were watching the videos and at work in our spare time when we should have been selling umbilical cord blood stem cell banking. Wow. But we were just kind of, having fun. And I thought, what? The world is changing at a rapid pace. I have options. And, I think it's important that I kind of live life and relax. The person that I was working with, that I trained with at this company, I ended up marrying 2 years later. I like that. And we've been married ever since. See. So I've known him for 20 years, yeah. and he was like definitely my best friend, and got to know me in a way, seeing me as this awkward person, this socially awkward person at work who loved to sing, who was into acting, just kind of like fumble around. And, it was a very easy decision for me to want to be with someone. And at that point I was in my early 30s. And so it was time, but I did not set out to find a guy. I wasn't set out to get married. I wasn't set out to have kids. It was it was not part of my plan.
Usually usually when we don't plan for something, That's usually when the universe turns around and says, you're ready for it. But 9 times out of 10, when we plan for something in our lives, the universe has a very comical way of saying it's not going to be that way.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of thrust in this position. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky, because for me at that time, I'm still, living with these very traditional values of when you're a mom and when you have kids. And, for me, it was like, okay, as soon as I became pregnant and I was with child, it was not about me. Everything was just was about my babies. And I made my whole world, you make a lot of sacrifices, I was at home. I was taking care of my children. I did work right up 2 weeks before my first was born. And then I worked part-time whilst I was pregnant with my second child. And when I had the two of them together and it was just me and them, I didn't have any family because I was in California. My whole family was on the East Coast, so I was doing it by myself. And my husband was going to work. And so I just created this world with my babies. But my husband and I did a lot of viewing and watching different series. And Netflix was in its infancy, too. So we were renting DVDs through Netflix that were getting sent to our house. So we rented The Tudors, that series. And you get these DVDs from Netflix that have other people's fingerprints all over them and stuff like that, So you're putting that in your DVD machine. And we had a projector I think it was from one of my husband's jobs that he had, that he would use for presentations. So we just projected these massive images on our wall, and we'd watch movies that way and series and everything. So I remember watching The Tudors thinking, you know what? I'm going to get into this. I'm going to get into film. I'm going to get into working with being on set, being in front of the camera, being behind the camera, and learning as much as I can. And I just didn't know how that was going to happen, but I knew that it was going to happen somehow. And that didn't happen until 2015. My kids were just old enough where I decided I wanted to get back into the game. And prior to that, I had spent a lot of my time learning something new, which was the art of ultra running, and really pushing my body to the max, so much where you are kind of how much further can I go when you've already have 40 miles behind you and you have 10 miles left of this 50-mile trail run, you got to get through it. And I learned a lot about how far I can take things physically and mentally. Anyhow, I took a break from that and just decided, I'm going to take a voiceover class. I'm going to take an improv class. I'm going to go online. I'm going to see what's out there. And I saw this one ad that was looking for extras for a film. And I just submitted my information, and I had a resume. I had work experience. And then a woman called me and she said, yeah, the director looked at you and he thought that you are actually perfect for what we're looking for. It's just a featured background role. You will be playing a press photographer in the 1980s decade. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, what is the name of the project? And she says, it's called Steve Jobs. And I was like, oh, okay. So I go out for my fitting. I'm learning about the project. And the day comes where I'm actually on set. And there's this person who comes walking up to me asking if everything is okay. You know, I'm holding this fake camera, like this prop, and I'm with another press photographer, and we're inside of this auditorium on location. And the person who came up to me to see if everything was okay was Danny Boyle. He was directing the movie. And I mean, I was just a background actor, but it was just me and 3 other people in this auditorium scene. And on stage, you had Michael Fassbender, Kate Winslet, and Michael Stuhlbarg all kind of fussing over this computer because it's the unveiling of the Apple computer.
Yes.
And so it's the 1980s, of course, like early 80s. So I got to watch this person that I idolized direct Michael Stuhlbarg and Michael Fassbender and Kate Winslet on stage, even though it's for a film. But I observed Danny Boyle give stage directions to these A-listers, even though it was being filmed. And it was like the most fascinating thing. And I wasn't allowed to talk to any of them. You know, Sarah Snook was also a few rows away, and you're not allowed to talk to any of them. But the thing about it is that it was so fascinating to me just how full circle it became. And that was, you know, it was 10 years ago, and I haven't stopped. So I've done a lot of independent film, professional film. I'm an equity actor here in London. And the thing that I have worked on that is, it's dealing with a little bit of controversy, but it's a film called Punjab 95, and it stars Diljit Dosanjh, and it's directed by Honey Trehan. It's based on a human rights activist by the name of Jaswant Singh Kalra, and very lengthy. And I know I only have some limited time to talk about it, but I was cast as a Canadian member of Parliament who helps this human rights activist get his word out to the world at large to some unlawful killings that were taking place in Punjab in the late 80s right through the mid 90s. And the reason why the film is dealing with some controversy is because the Indian government is concerned about the impact that it might have on the Sikh youth population, and are worried about things like riots and things of that nature because it's based on an act like a martyr. And Honey Trehan, you know, when you look at filmmaking nowadays and how everything is global, and you look at storytelling and how the industry really is global.
Massively.
And he is someone who, talking to him personally, you know, he's telling me what his influences are as a filmmaker. You know, big fan of Alfred Hitchcock and his work. Like, you get that feeling that he wants to be working with other industry professionals who are, you know, UK based and maybe even US based. And his last film is on Netflix. It was called Ratakali High, which is it means one dark night. It's a thriller. Received a wonderful rating in Rotten Tomatoes. It's like 90%. And I watched it, and it's a great film. So I was very honored to work with Honey Trehan. But that film was set for release on February 7th, and it's been postponed. But it will come out, and it will come out internationally, and then most likely will go to Netflix because his last film went to Netflix. But it's a journey for everyone as an actor, and everybody's journey is different.
True.
And I can't. I've figured out here, I feel like in the UK, and I think it's really unfair to young artists, especially artists who feel like they can't afford to go to these top-notch drama schools, and like they don't have a place. And I know what that feels like when you're kind of like in a financial stronghold where you feel like you can't do it unless you do it entirely on your own, which is really impossible this day and age with the cost of living crises.
Yeah.
But there are things that I feel like younger people can definitely do, and they are doing, with content creation and understanding the tech aspects of what goes into telling the story. And 10 years ago, I picked up a camera, a DCLR camera. I learned how to use it. I understood, camera technique. At the same time, I'm self-taught and learning Adobe Premiere as an editing tool, and still use that. And working behind the camera as a producer, doing everything from being a project coordinator to holding a boom to doing anything on set, and just to see how that dynamic works. And then auditioning and working in front of the camera and putting my heart and soul out there as not a beautiful person. Because you know what? I see so many women my age that are like going at it with the Botox and the lips and the whole, come on, they got to reel that stuff in. It's ridiculous. I was talking to this one makeup artist who said to me, she said, you know what? It's becoming a problem even with younger actresses now.
That's true.
Because these period here in the UK, and there's always, somebody got their lips puffed and somebody's doing this and that with their cheeks. And it's just like, so it's like, it's frustrating when I see that, because you wonder, what is the sustainability factor in a person's appearance? And what people really want to see is, why wasn't I made of stone like these? People want to relate to that kind of vulnerability. They want to see that side to things. So a lot of the roles that I've taken on are not beautiful women. It's just women who are dealing with some kind of an affliction, whether it's a spiritual one, could be addiction, it could be domestic violence, and where you're at your darkest moments. And so as an older person, I feel like there's a lot of storytelling capacity with older actors, and that you can't sell yourself short and say, well, 'cause people have actually said this to me, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm an actor. Oh, really? Aren't you kind of like old for that? It's like, what do you mean?
It's a stereotype thing. It's so unfair. I've gone through this with quite a lot of people where different professions have a certain age limit. For example, boxing or sports massively, you only have a certain time limit. Singers can go on for as long as they can, or for forever. But there are certain things where people put you in a box and say you can only do it for a short length of time or a certain length of time. But I don't believe that. I believe it's how well you look after yourself and your body, and if you know that is your purpose and your service to the world, then you should always continue to keep doing it. That's my reality on things. Because I'm such an optimist of life, I always see things from a different perspective rather than this pessimistic perspective from people's insecurities that they like to portray upon you, because they're insecure and they might not have fulfilled their service and purpose, they feel like you shouldn't fulfill your service and purpose.
Right. They
So
project.
there you go.
know.
And that's a massive insecurity that so millions of people have in the world.
Yeah. And I could see it when I sense it when people are feeling that way. And so my reaction is just more or less just kind of like science and asking questions and want to get more out of them. It's like, why do you say these things and why do you think these things? And then telling them like, well, you know, in my case, I don't see it as trying to be that person so much as somebody who has something to offer from the heart, you know. And then I'm a huge fan of supporting other actors and my other friends who are creators. I take so much joy in watching other people succeed and be happy with what they're doing because I understand how much goes into that. Yeah. And I have so many stories of different people that I've like hung out with and watched them just blossom into like incredible artists. And it gives me so much hope. I don't ever feel like, oh, gee, I wish that was me. Of course I wish it was me, but it was like the envy or the jealousy, that some people feel about that kind of thing, the success of others. I don't know. Maybe it might have something to do with the fact that I've grown up with siblings who are all trying to make things happen for themselves, and I love them, and you know, and I understand it. So I see this, like, I see it in people. And my dream someday, I do want to keep doing what I'm doing. I would love to work I'm doing films right now, but to be in a series of some kind where it's a character that is imparting some kind of wisdom, but at the same time is essentially a badass in ways that go about unexpected. And it doesn't have to be forceful. It doesn't have to be aggressive. It can be very subtle and just done with a lot of conviction. And what that character will be, I have no idea. It could be. For all I know, it could happen when I'm 80 years old. Well, do you know what I mean? And I wouldn't have a problem with that.
You know the funny thing is that there are people in the world who have started businesses at 60, 70, 80, even 90 years old. And their legacy, no, for real, and their legacy still lives on because that was their purpose. So you can, and some people say, oh, I don't want to have it when I'm 70. I'm going to be too old. But I remember my grandma was saying to me, and she was in her 80s at the time, she said to me, the only thing that I wished for, she said, is I had just a younger body, but my spirit feels like a kid. She said it feels like he's energized. It's just that the body that we're in, we're borrowing only for a certain time. She said the only thing that she wished she had, which was different, is her body. So I said to her, you can use mine anytime, and she laughed. You know, she laughed. But I understood her concept and her youthfulness inside her. And I think we all get to that point in our life where, yes, our body does deteriorate, but it's not even our fault because we've worked so hard, we've gone through challenges, and those challenges has put a toll on our body, you know. But at the same time, we should always see the greatness of what we've done. And we shouldn't necessarily look for validation from other people. But sometimes because of our past, and sometimes our past goes within us and holds us in certain ways, we always question whether or not we've done enough. Mm-hmm. But I always see, like I say, I always see life from an optimistic point of view. So regardless of what's happening, like my grandma said, you know, she wished she just had a younger body. I know that she done the best that she could, and she was brilliant at what she done. And she came from a very, very poor background, and it's actually quite beautiful to talk about because she came from a very, very poor background, but she had a beautiful heart. Whereas my grandfather came from a very wealthy background and he wasn't a nice guy. So you can, so you can, and I always say to people, everything in life is a choice. And just because you feel like you've made one bad choice in your life, you can always counteract that choice with something else. You're not bound to that choice forever. And it's just about your mindset. So I always go with that in life. And I'm so glad that one of the things that I was going to say to you is that you are the first guest I've ever had on the show that I've only ever had to ask one question. And
really?
Yeah, seriously. And you've said for an hour, you've told me your story of your life and what you've been through. And for me, this is inspiring because some people will talk and then they stop and then I ask a question, but you felt comfortable enough to be able to say, Savia, I'm just going to start and I'm just going to talk. And I love that. No, I really do love that because you've told people from the beginning of where your parents began to the love, which I see, and even if people can't see it, I see it, that you have for your siblings. You have that. Yeah. And then going on and telling people that you can have your own independence. And with independence comes, choices that you make and nobody else can, manipulate those choices. Is very, very important. It's so important. And you have the power to dictate in your life what you want to become. And then you go on, to say how you found your life partner. And there are millions of people in the world who don't have that chance to do that, to find their partner and have that connection and stay with them for over 20 years, and then build a family. So you've literally gone from the beginning of your life to where your present day of who you are. And one thing that you've also done as well is that you've also told people to basically never give up, no matter who you are, no matter how old you are, no matter, always have that high standard of vision that you can achieve. And for me, Corinne, that is very, very important. And that's what the podcast is about. So even though I know the hour is already gone and I love that, but at the same time, I want to say thank you to you for telling your story.
Thank you. I thank you for having me. And I was aware of my pacing and just making sure that, that I was, you don't want to just kind of talk in a way where it's not making sense. It's not coming together. But I've been living long enough where it does mean so much to me. And sadly, it's coming up on 2 years, but my father actually passed away at the age of 80. And he did not want to die. See? He still wanted to continue working as a recording engineer. He had a concert that he was planning to record, the Rhode Island Philharmonic Orchestra. He was contract with them for 40 years. Wow. But COVID had done a number on his business. Yes. And long story short, he invited some people into his home who needed a place to stay. And then my father ultimately ended up being a victim of elder abuse. And so, which resulted in him passing away. But when he was on his deathbed, and I flew out and I was with him and I watched him pass away. So I'm dealing heavily with a grieving process and learning a lot through that. But I held his hand, and he couldn't communicate. His eyes were closed, but he was squeezing my hand. And
my grandfather done the same thing to me.
We had the music playing in his room. And Sound Dynamics Associates is his the name of his company, and he created his own YouTube channel, which is still up and running, and it's gained a lot of followers since he passed away, which is so bizarre. But we were listening to some music on his YouTube channel, and he's holding my hand, and even though he couldn't say anything or do anything, but his hand it's so sad, his hand was just making these very subtle movements as if he was trying to conduct the music. So it was, the life has all of these like these circles of just kind of things come in a circle, and it keeps moving, and it just kind of momentum, and it's the same thing that happens again, and it's constant. So with younger people, if I could offer any advice, it's like, look, don't get so stressed out over having to do it all, because one of the best things that you can do for your art is to allow some of your life. You need life experience in order to truly make something what it is, and take stock in knowing that, well, even if it's bad things that are happening to you, take stock in knowing that it will pass. And anything could happen in the future, and, get a good night's sleep, hang out with good people, and 100%. You'll be fine, You'll be fine. Hug!
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Hugs are always a good one. That's definitely a good one. I'm a hugger, so I understand that one 110%. So, Corinne, this is where I humbly say to you, Thank you so much for your kindness, your compassion, your honesty, but more than anything else, you just being authentically you and giving me your time, because I always say that time in life is precious, and who you share it with is one of the most beautiful things that you can do in the world. So I am humbled, and I want to say thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you so much. And guys, I want to say thank you so much for listening to the As People podcast, and please remember you can subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or any other platform that you prefer listening to. Please also visit the Us People podcast website to listen to any episode from our previous guests. Guys, this is where I say thank you so much for listening. Stay happy, stay positive, and as always, please continue to be kind to one another. Take care.
Society has made me want to validate me from my illusion that awaits me, from how the people will perceive me. It's my illusion that awaits me. We fight in our war with ourselves. Our mental health is silencing us from our heart. Social media is taking our time, connecting with each other soul to soul. Why we dance on TikTok, strike a post on Instagram, fight the web on a Twitter feed, link a thing on Snapchat. Why we dance on TikTok, strike a post on a Instagram, fight the web on a Twitter feed, link a thing on Snapchat. Why we dance on TikTok?
Yay, that was awesome. I just love people, I love just human beings. Like, everybody's dealing with something. Everybody's like suffering. I mean, there are like a lot of people I'm not happy with right now. I could have, I mean, I know the podcast is over and everything, so it's just like, I could have really gone off on like,
strike a post on Instagram, fight the web on a Twitter feed, link a thing on Snapchat. Why we dance on TikTok, strike a post on a Instagram, fight the web on a Twitter feed, link a thing on Snapchat. Why we dance on TikTok? 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 It's taking our time. Why we dance on TikTok? With each other soul to soul. Why we dance on TikTok? Strike a post on Instagram, fight the web on a Twitter feed, link a thing on Snapchat. Why we dance on TikTok? Strike a post on Instagram, fight the web on a Twitter feed, link a thing on Snapchat.